Welcome to another episode of Sync Riffs. My name's Charles, Blue Buddha Entertainment, CEO and President. Joining me, as always, holding it down, co-host Chase Walker, indie blues rock artist. Good evening, Chase. How's it going?
Hey. Good to see you, Charles. How you doing?
Doing good. It's we're in the middle of summer, and the heat is on, and we thought today would be a great episode, as we all know, to touch on from the indie artist perspective of working through this work stoppage in film and television. As you know, back in May, the WGA went on strike, and then just 2-3 days ago, the unions, actors unions, SAG and AFTRA joined in on the strike. So we know how we got here, and I think it'd be cool to talk about strategies for independent artists on working through the work stoppage. You know, we get emails from artists saying, "Hey, what's going on with productions?" You know, pretty much into the fall, the longer that the strike continues, you know, without any writers writing new shows, new content, and without any actors to appear in these episodes, the fall schedule is going to look tremendously different. Possible scenarios for the studios, you know, pivoting to more reality, non-scripted shows. And what that means for independent artists, just want to touch on some strategies, you know, things that artists can do so that when we get to the other side, post the work stoppage, we as agents and independent artists can be there for our music supervisors and providing the music they need. So one of the things at the top, Chase and I were discussing is, you know, getting your house in order. And what I mean by that is with respect to your metadata. We always talk about metadata and the importance of it in past podcasts, but really going through your library, making sure everything's taken care of there. If you're missing lyrics, missing any artwork, your split sheets, all that good information. So that way you're equipped to actively pitch your music, work with your sync agent, work with the music supervisor. So that's what I have on the top of my list as far as getting your house in order. And then with that, you know, Chase as an indie artist knows this all too well, but stay the course of your songwriting process. Write your music, work on collabs with producers. This is a great time to connect with your community, your producers, co-writers, and really have strong music to pitch once the strike's over. So looking at your catalog, if you're missing, you know, love interest tunes, party tunes, things we talked about in past episodes, and filling the gap for those songs you might be light on in your catalog. So with that as well, I would say overall, you know, keeping your routine. You know, we all, you know, we worked through the shutdown of the pandemic. It's a similar type of feeling, not knowing when are we going to be on the other side of productions being back in place, briefs coming through. Things are slowing down now. So the upside is, you know, it's a great time to focus on the music. What kind of goals would you say, Chase, as far as if you're a songwriter, we're in July now, what's a realistic goal as far as churning out songs in the next 2-3 months, assuming if the strike continues that long?
I think, you know, it depends on what your process is, as far as writing music and getting the music recorded and everything. You know, for me, in a couple months, I can get, you know, a couple dozen songs, you know, produced and the like, if that's all that I'm putting my time toward. I think, though, you know, the big thing is to get to be able to break down the steps in the process of toward, as far as writing the song and what is going to be required in order to get that song recorded. So, if that's booking the studio time, booking band rehearsals, whatever that may be, just breaking it down and getting it kind of a laid out schedule as far as that is concerned.
100%. And to put it in context, Chase, it streamlines the process when Chase and I are working with a band that if there are multiple co-writers, then we have one point of contact, we have assurances, and we know, rest assured, we don't have to check in with the other co-writes. One point person, one yes from the group. And as speaking with Jen Piken or Melanie Mitchell in past episodes, due diligence, they trust in us that we dotted the I's and crossed the T's, and they can place that song with confidence. So yeah, that's I think a good segue as well. Chase, to thread that needle, and maybe you can touch on, I know you're working on some tracks, and I'm just curious. I don't think I ever posed a question to you, but I had Jeff Caudill in from Low Coast, and we were talking about his creative process. So when inspiration hits you, Chase, at any given day, are you a hard journal type of guy writing notes and lyrics, or are you speaking in your voice memos on your iPhone?
That's an interesting question. It depends on how the idea comes to me. Because if somehow I come up with a lyric idea or just a general song topic idea, you know what I mean? Because sometimes an idea will come to me where there's a subject matter, and I think of, there's a cool way I could phrase that, or there's a cool way that I could set up a narrative that explains that. For those things, I definitely tend to use my notes app, and just kind of type down whatever that is. But then, in other cases, when I'm just kind of playing around with something instrumentally, or, just humming something in my head, there's certain ideas that, it just can't be written down effectively, you know what I mean, without it getting convoluted, but findable.
Well said. It comes to memory, and we're going to probably air it in a week or so, but a composer we had in, he said the same thing, where he said if someone stole his iPhone and they'd look at it in the notes, they couldn't make heads or tails of it, but he knows exactly, this is this and that. But yeah, and what about, Jason, before we move on and just to wrap up this topic, but is there any kind of timeline, and we've talked about it in past episodes, when you record a track and then you go back 2 days, 3 days later with fresh ears, and then Katie Cole in a podcast was talking about her process for revising, reworking a song. But what do you find that, do you take 2 weeks off, you come back? Because if you're too close to it, you might overanalyze something.
100%. Yeah, I think, even throughout the, especially if you're someone who, like me, who records all of their own music themselves, it's, even throughout the recording process, as you're creating it, it's important to take a step away, because it's easy to get lost in get lost in the context of your own creation. You know what I mean? Where you start hearing things in ways that aren't really how people will perceive it, essentially. I tend to take at least, a day, at least 24 hours, after, to go back to something and see if I still like it. But at the same time, it's important to know what it is you're after, to have an end goal in mind, to not just be chasing something that, like, I'll know it when I hear it kind of thing. You know what I mean?
Right.
Because if you're doing that, you're gonna drive yourself crazy. You just keep
Mm,
working on it until it's until you're in the ground. But if you have a reference point, if you
mm,
have something that you're trying to if you have some state at which you want that track to be and you know
mhm.
what that is, then at the very least you can kind of tune your ears to that sort of thing while you're going back and trying to see if it sounds the way that you think it should sound. So, for example, for me, a lot of my stuff heavily references a lot of the early Black Keys material, right?
Mhm,
And
mhm.
so, if I'm trying to make sure that I'm not getting lost in listening to my song over and over again, right? I'll
Mhm.
spend some time, I'll spend an hour or so just kind of listening through a Black Keys album and then go
Yeah.
back to it and see if anything sounds weird. And
Mm,
the main thing is, allow your first impression of something
mhm.
to dictate your opinion of it as you're working through this. You know what I mean? Don't try and listen so super carefully because most people don't listen that way. But if
Yes.
something strikes you on the first time you listen through it, then there's probably something there.
Yeah, no, I like that because I think to thread the needle and sort of it's that your gut feeling, that vibe, that emotion, and that's the tricky part of music. It's so subjective. What might move you may not move me, so to speak, and that element of um, you know listening through something and with a fresh perspective, or hearing what I like to say is having someone else in the room with you, whether that's a producer or an engineer or a remixer. Just like, I know, Chase, if you have a track, it's in demo form, or even some of our artists we work with, they'll bounce it off us just to say, hey, am I going in the right direction, or I'm in the weeds? And I think that's sort of taking stock of your inventory before you're too far off the path of no return, so to speak. And I think, to thread the and button up this topic of, external forces in our world, pandemic, strike, earthquake, things that are beyond, not within our control, existential forces that we can't control. So the things we can't control, be disciplined in continuing the art, the craft, the music. And then when we get to the other side, we'll be better and stronger for it. And instead of having anxiety, freaking out, thinking about every day of, what's going to happen, and that discipline uh, will translate into the finished product. So with that, I think, we had a mini panel a week or so, greatly attended, and thank you to all those who attended. And we had some follow-up questions wanted to share that we posted up on our IG page at Sync Riffs, and wanted to go down that rabbit hole. And they pertain to, one question we got was, are there any benefits from a sync perspective to creating your own publishing company? I got the impression from someone that it looks better to music supervisors or agents, but not sure if that's true. So, for clarity on terminology, we would call it, your vanity publishing entity. You set up your DBA. If Charles Levan is a writer, and then Blue Buddha Music Publishing is my vanity publishing entity. It's so when I receive checks, it flows through my doing business as Blue Buddha Publishing Music. So from a clearance perspective, all we care, we get the writer and pub info. If it's your vanity, that's great to know. We pass it along to the supervisor. Does it look more professional? In my experience, as long as we know it's you control your own publishing, it's a vanity publishing. That's all we care about. It's expedient. Everything's sorted out. So for looks, does it? I would say no. As long as everything's set up correctly, and what Chase and I had talked about in the mini panel, before you work with us, a sync agent, your songs are registered with the PROs, performance rights org, ASCAP, BMI, or CSAC. And that cue sheet information, the splits, the writer, and the master share, all that is kept somewhere on a PDF. So when we need it as a sync agent, we encode that information to the metadata, and it's streamlined, and we're off to the races. So that is sort of the nickel tour of what's really important to us. Anything you want to add on, say, with your songs? I know you're recording new tracks, Chase. When do you correct with ASCAP or BMI? If you register a batch of songs, it's more expedient.
I believe so. It's been a minute since I've registered any material actually, but it's something that I'm coming up on needing to do here with my new releases coming up this fall. Yeah, if I remember correctly, I think you can register as a batch collection if they're all in the same, say, like album. But I know that a lot of people will register, their singles and they'll register their instrumentals as separate tracks in their PROs, and that's, I mean, I can see ways in which that would be helpful, but for the most part in sync, that's something that's if they're using the track, they're typically using the vocal mix. There was something that I was going to say on this. One point that I wanted to make, just as far as this question is concerned, is that there's really in the sync landscape, there's really no way to fake it till you make it, right? And that's, I think, where this question's coming out of is like, does having your own publishing entity look kind of more professional? Is there any possibility that it could draw, say, a higher sync rate because you're with a publisher instead of not being with a publisher? Well, the thing is, the supervisors know which publishers are big time and require a large rate, and they know who's not, and if they've never heard of your publishing entity, it's all the same to them. You're at the indie level rates, you know what I mean? So
yeah,
the main thing is making sure that in your metadata, it is as clear as possible who owns the rights to what, and that the song is completely clearable on their end. And to what degree that may be. If it's a cover, you're explaining exactly that it's a cover and that you own the master, or you and your producer own the master, and so at Capitol Records is the person to contact.
Sure. Yeah, no, that's a good. I think, you sort of, that's reading me to the lines of that question, and that's a really good analysis there. And similarly, just to button it up on the metadata, something sort of a pet peeve, if you will, sort of copywriting when we get tracks, if things are inconsistent, if, say, in the band name or the song title, there's parentheses or there's an underscore, because it's almost like, I don't know if you see that a lot, Chase, but it's sort of shorthand. Someone's shorthand inputting something, and then there's extra characters that don't belong there.
Yeah, and that's something. It's kind of a preset as far as for a lot of the recording software that's out there. A lot of them will automatically add that information to the end of the track title as you bounce it. And it'll say things, like as far as the bit rate, the sample rate, and there might be some extra information as far as like which version of the master it may be. What I mean? That's what I typically tend to see. But yeah, you definitely want to make sure that when you're sending those out to any sync agents, and especially if you're sending those out to any music supervisors, that you're
Mhm.
condensing, you're consolidating that information down to just the title, just the artist name, just exactly what whoever you're sending it to needs to know, because we're all on a tight schedule when things aren't
Mhm.
completely shut down, and we don't have time to go searching through, like, because sometimes when a lot of that excess information is included, it can be hard to tell what the actual title of the song is. Is
Mhm.
it Midnight Moon 12, or is it Midnight Moon and then it's 12 dB? You know what I'm saying? Like,
Yeah.
so yeah, you just want to make sure that you're not throwing anything extra in there that doesn't need to be in there.
Spot on, spot on. And I think, similarly to thread that needle on, because from time to time we'll get submissions where people ask, are we looking, will we preview their tracks? And I think it's a good practice to ask if you're having a dialogue with a sync agent. It's to say, hey, what's your preferred method of receiving music to check out? SoundCloud Disco. Uh, so an example that's an extra step for us, if we get wave or MP3 high res files, what have you, in Dropbox, it's actually an extra step because then we have to download it to our hard drive. So my preference is the straight up stream from a SoundCloud or a Disco. Spotify, obviously the bonus. We see your artwork, we see your bio. But if it's through Dropbox, and the other thing that kind of triggers a response in me negatively is if it's in Dropbox and then there's no artwork. So then there's no information, or the information is not all that. So then I'm a visual guy, so seeing it in the artwork in Spotify, the lyrics are there. If there's a visual element, video, I can connect the dots, and that will increase my interest level of whoa, it's the full picture of an indie artist. So, anyways, that's just want to thread that needle, and moving on to the next question we had, which is a good segue. Chase is question is, what are the top 3 to 5 things an artist should be focusing on or doing if they're looking to get a sync placement? So the top 3 to 5, I'll distill it to the top 3, and in order of importance. Number 1, be authentic and write great songs. It's all about the music at the end of the day. So that'd be my number 1. Then obviously tied with that is solid production, your mix and your master, the arrangement, the phonic, the sonic brand, if you will, and elements of your song. Your vocals should marry and match the arrangement of your piece. Your lyrics shouldn't take us out of the song. And similarly, the arrangement or the instrumentation shouldn't clash with your vocals. It should be seamless, a perfect marriage. And last but not least, which we started out the episode on or a minute ago, is having solid metadata. So it's just, I think a perfect analogy would be we're the days of a physical CD or vinyl. Treat your release like a traditional release through a label. It'll look polished, it's professional, because again, the competitive landscape, agents, supervisors, hundreds, thousands of pieces of music and releases that we're getting at any given moment. We're just scratching the surface. Supervisors get 20 times more of what Chase and I see. So with that, Chase, what would be your top 3 to 5 on what someone should focus on looking to get into sync?
I mean, I think those are definitely the biggest. And just bouncing off of those, as far as making making great material, making great songs,
Mhm.
what that really means is knowing what it is your song is trying to do, and not being ambiguous about that. because there's a lot of writers out there who they write a song that's like, what if you, they write songs that if you asked them what they're about, they'd kind of dance around the subject and go on this long kind of explanation, and they couldn't actually tell you in a single sentence what that song is about. And that's something that for the purposes of sync licensing, it can be really prohibitive toward getting you a placement, because what music in film and TV really requires is that whatever the emotion is that the song is attempting to convey, that it is conveying that emotion as strongly as possible. Because that's what they're looking for. They're looking for something that intensifies the emotion of a scene, whether that's a sad emotion or an angry emotion or a happy emotion. So you have to be very clear about what is it that you're going after, and how is it that you can most effectively do that. Because there are a lot of ways that in the process of writing a song, things can get confused and things can kind of branch off in different directions. And so if you have that thing and you know what that is from the outset, then you can reference any of the lines that you're coming up with to whether or not that is in line with what the song is trying to do, what the end goal of the song is.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's really deep, and I think it really does encapsulate our past episodes. You just, tied it with a bow there, which is spot on. And to share that with you, Chase, I think to, pose a question back to you, because this ties in, Neil Sethi from our band Heir Apparent had posted on his IG post that he was in a session with an artist, and they learned that Neil wasn't classically trained in music and production, so that to them was a deal breaker. So he posed the question, or I'll pose to you, as far as it's sort of like a chicken or the egg. Artists who may not have theory and composition training, they play by ear, they can't read music notation. And have you worked with artists, and did that hold them back, or what was your experience there? What advice would you give to them, because it's so competitive out there in getting a gig and navigating that?
Yeah. Well, I've definitely worked with artists who knew nothing, who knew absolutely no music theory at all, and I've worked with artists who knew way more music theory than me. Really, all that music theory comes down to is that in knowing it's to break it down, it's music theory is essentially a roadmap, and it can open up new opportunities, new places you can take things, but you don't necessarily need it to get where you're going, right? Like, could you possibly get from Tarzana to Glendale without using your Google Maps? Yeah, but if you did use your Google Maps, it might show you some routes that might get you there a little quicker. That's all that music theory does, right? So you don't need it, but if you have it, you might see things in a different way, where you can do something that someone who doesn't know any music theory would never think to do. Now, that being said, what I've noticed about the creation of music, as far as it's concerned with like its relationship to music theory, what my opinion is, at least, is that the most creative pieces of art are not the pieces of art that do the most, right? It's or it's to explain that better. It's not the pieces of art that express that the artist knows how to do the most things as an artist,
Mm,
right? It's the pieces of art that do the most with what the artist is able to do,
mm,
right?
mm,
So think of it in terms of like having recording equipment or having guitar pedals or amps or just musical gear in general, right?
mm,
Having nice equipment is a lot less important than having equipment that you know how to use.
yeah,
And that's
yeah,
the same is true with music theory. It doesn't matter how much music theory you know if you don't know how to use how to get the most out of what you know how to do. That's
100.
what creativity comes down to. And there are a lot of artists. I mean, like for example, Jacob Collier. You know, if you're someone who thinks that your music has to be highly um, complex when it comes to the theory of it,
Mm,
I mean, I I would wager to bet that it's going to be a long time before anyone comes up with anything that's more theoretically complex than what Jacob Collier is already doing right now,
mm,
right?
mm, mm,
And if you listen to his music, there are some of his songs that, you know, they're moving to certain people, but they're not going to be moving to a crowd who wants to listen to Taylor Swift or a crowd who
mm,
wants to listen to ACDC. You know what I
mhm,
mean?
mhm.
They're they have they have a way of conveying emotion in their own unique way.
Mm, mhm.
But through the complexity of something is not necessarily what conveys the most amount of emotion, essentially. The
Sh-
more, as Jacob Collier would say, because this is one of the things I think, or one of the quotes that I've quoted from him most often
mhm,
is that every time you add a new note into the harmony,
mm,
and this is not an exact quote, but this is essentially what he said.
Sure.
Every time you add another note into your harmony, into a chord, um, you're adding an extra amount of responsibility to give that note context, right?
Mm, mm, mhm.
And so the same is true with every aspect of creating music, right? Of creating art, really.
Sure.
The more complexity you give it, the more responsibility you have to make that complexity make sense.
Mm,
Otherwise, it's complexity for complexity's sake,
yeah.
and no one really cares. No one really
Right.
cares how many notes you can play if it doesn't make them feel anything.
100%. Sometimes, like you said, we've talked about it past episodes. Less is more. The simplicity of, I was talking with Jermaine Stiegel, the composer, and we were talking about happy chords or major chords denoting happiness and minor chords for sadness. And he's like, you would think that, but not always necessarily the case. And he was talking about, sustaining a note, and those nuances of texture that give a certain emotion. But yeah, that's, I think, it'll be cool one day. You know, we're going to have a future chat with Annabelle Lee and talk about, she writes a lot of indie rock with the grunge sound of the 90s. And it'll be cool to chat with her about her process. But no, it's like you said, chasing past ones. It's not just a 40 to hour long conversation, but can
100%.
go down a rabbit hole. But on the closing question that we got, and thanks to Arette for posing this question. How much does an artist's social presence, i.e., followers, branding, etc., influence the decision of a sync agent to work with an artist and place the song? So I'm going to answer part of the puzzle there, and to set things up. At the end of August, coming up in August rather, we're going to launch a beta of song, uh, our Sonic Brand Songwriting Masterclass, which we're going to uh, unpack and connect the dots between sync and songwriting and one's artist brand. But most soups, depending on soups that we've interviewed and talked with, it's all about the song. So from our perspective as a sync agent, though, what we like to do, looking back to the days of a label perspective, is path of least resistance. If you're an artist that you're bubbling on the fringe of potentially getting a label deal because you have the socials, you're touring here in LA, you're a household name in certain circles, hotel, cafe, the whiskey, and say you open for Taylor Swift. So those things, in my humble opinion, will help your song raise to the top of the listening priority from 100 songs that are on deck for Music Super's playlist. So in that regard, that information is cogent. And as a sync agent, that's our go-to with certain approaches. Of course, at the end of the day, it's all about the song. But Chase, I know you've been going down the rabbit hole with your rebranding and your sound. So what advice would you give as far as the socials go?
Yeah. Well, definitely a strong social following gives you a lot more bargaining power when you're looking to make a deal with a sync agent. Because having having a strong trajectory as an artist means that you could potentially at some point call for a much larger sync fee, right? Now, more important than that, I would argue, is that your main goal as an artist, or even for us as sync agents, our main goal with our supervisor clients is to make sure that the artists we send them are able to stick in their head and that they're able to recall those artists and that we have those artists when they have a need for that, whatever kind of music that may be. Because, they get sent hundreds of songs for every single placement, and it's impossible to guarantee any specific song for a specific placement, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so that means it comes down to a numbers game. And often, music supervisors will look back through their backlog of tracks that they've been submitted by their trusted sources, their sync agents, who they know everything in that catalog of submitted tracks is going to be clearable. And they'll check that first before they start reaching out to people, because obviously they have those tracks already, right? And so, if we send them a death metal country track, let's say, we don't have any death metal country tracks, but let's say we sent them one. They might not need that for the placement right now, but maybe in a month from now, they have a placement where that's exactly what they need. And so they're going to remember, oh, that's the art. There was an artist that got sent to us, that had this kind of vibe. Let's go find them. Now, the only way that's going to happen is if the supervisor gets the sense that they are a real artist and that they have a presence on social media, that they have cover art on their material, that, because now as well, when we send stuff through Disco, we're able to send promotional photos and the artist bios and things like that along with the music. So all of those things are ways that we're able to stick our artists in the memory of our supervisor clients, because more often than not, they're going to come back to what we've sent them before. And we've gotten several placements that way. We just got a placement for one of our a fellow Belmont alumni that we represent, who I think when that request came through, it wasn't from a direct pitch that we'd sent out, was it? I think they just kind of hit us up, right?
Yeah. I think it was a combination, but also you hit it cogently there, Chase, is the concept of on camera. If there's a scene and they need a band playing on camera, and sometimes we get that call and they need to be local to LA, grunge band, so they got to look the part. They'll look at the artwork, look at the CD art, look at the band photo. And I think that helps seal the deal of authenticity. It all goes back to what we've talked about in the past. And that's
100%.
yeah. So, somewhere I think what you're doing, Chase, since you've been playing as a teenager, with, and that's something to sneak peek and we'll talk more about in future episodes. But, the approach to crafting one's artwork and your look, your style, there's the sonic brand and then there's the artist brand. So that's something, if you check in on our website, we'll talk about in our beta launch. And then to sneak peek for next week, we're going to have a music supervisor in the studio and we'll be promoting that on IG. And with that, subscribe, like, hit that notification bell. And thanks for everybody's support. We're coming up at about 20 episodes. We launched in April. Feedback's been great and amazing, and everyone's support. Really appreciate you all. And with that, we'll catch you on the other side. Namaste, and thanks for tuning in. Go.